Psalm 23 is where we're at today. Psalm 23. Are you ready for a good message from heaven? Are you ready? Okay, so man, this is good. I'm excited about this message today. I had been working on this for the last year, for a week or so. But man, I'm just trusting the Holy Spirit that He's going to do some incredible work today. Psalm 23. So we started this series, Faith, and talking about faith in the last few weeks. How many of you would agree with me? This is something that we need to be talking about because of all the craziness that are happening in our country, in our world, and this pandemic, this virus, this financial turmoil, riots, and divisions. Would you not agree that somehow you got to find a way to embrace faith? And today I want to talk to you about something I believe is very vital for us to understand. Faith in our darkest valley. Faith in the darkest valley. Rebecca, when she was in kindergarten, and she was going to church, her and her family were going to church, and so one day the Sunday school teacher had an idea for all of the kids in that classroom that they are going to memorize Psalm 23. They're going to memorize it, and they have a month to memorize Psalm 23. So Rebecca, she started studying, and she would just use her fingers, six verses. She would just kind of go through and memorize, and she would just do it every single day. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, and she would do it every day. Well, that day came when she was, when she had to give or recite this Psalm 23. Well, she was, as a little, girl, she was so scared and nervous. Well, she stood up in front of people, and she began to recite Psalm 23, all 6 verses. And then she got a little award. It was a bookmark. And the bookmark basically had a picture of a sheep laying in a green pasture and having the whole Psalm 23 printed on it. And so she just took that bookmark and placed it in her little Bible. Well, years later, she got married and, she got pregnant. Well, 18 weeks in carrying this baby, all of a sudden something happened. This baby didn't make it. And so what happened into this story is that, and I had to call Gemma, because she's the doctor, and I had to call her last night. I'm like, Gemma, you gotta, I gotta call you. I gotta ask you if this is really accurate. Well, what happened in the story was that Rebecca just had to wait until her body would let go of that baby. So for a couple of weeks, she had this dead baby inside of her womb and just waiting for that moment for her body to let it go. And so I had to call Dr. Gemma. I'm like, is this really real? Is this true? And she was like, yeah, it's true. And so that night, she began to feel this intense pain. And so she figured, maybe this is a night that my body is going to let this baby out. And she began to have this pain, and then it became just so painful that she began to cry. And she began to hold her womb and just crying, and she was just weeping in pain and fear. And plus, losing this baby. And it was one of her darkest moments in her life. And she said, I was in my darkest valley. And she said, I don't even know what to do. I couldn't even make a simple decision whether to go to the hospital or not, or whether to wake up my husband or not. I mean, she couldn't even make a simple decision whether to stand up or sit down. I mean, she was in so much pain. She was in the middle of her darkest valley. Then all of a sudden, as she was crying out to God and just begging God to be with her, to help her during this pain and this fear, God began to remind her for decades ago when she memorized Psalm 23. And all of a sudden, she began to recite Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. It should be on the screen. You can click on that. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for His name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for I know He's with me. For His rod and His staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the midst of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely your goodness and your love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of my God forever. And all of a sudden, something supernatural took place in the midst of her darkest valley. God began to just embrace her with His presence, and the feeling of fear and the feeling of just so much pain, all of a sudden was replaced with God's presence and His love and His comfort and strength. Here's what I know, friends, that there are so many people today are walking in their darkest valley. And a lot of them, they're saying it's just way too much to handle. In this deep darkest, gloomy valley, we see that people are so isolated. They're dealing with mental breakdown. They're depressed. They are scared. They are gripped with so much fear. And they are somehow losing hope in the midst of all of this. In fact, in this darkest valley, people are so overwhelmed that they wanted to give up. In fact, some had given up. This week was an incredible week for me, but yet it's a terrible week for me. When I started school about 5 years ago to get my master's, I haven't been in school for the last 12 years, and so I needed some help. And I came to this brother who was part of my class, and I just asked him, could you help me with my paper? I'm really struggling. I'm struggling with all of this. Would you help me? And this brother said, yes, I will help you. For the next year or so, this brother have helped me with my schooling. He was so involved in ministry. In fact, he began to pastor. He began to impact so many people, including me. But yet one day, his darkest, gloomy day came. His wife left him. And after his wife left him, everything else just began to crumble in his life. His darkest valley began to be real. And one thing after another just took place. And 2 weeks ago, he couldn't handle just one thing after another were taking place. And last Sunday, my dear friend took his life. He shot himself. Here's what I know. That this darkest valley, we all had been there. We've witnessed it. We've all experienced it. This darkest valley that I'm talking about is no respecter of people. You and I, even the mature Christians, even those that are strong in their faith. In fact, I have a brother who came to me a couple of months ago. And this is a really strong brother that I look up to. And strong, mature Christian who loved Jesus. But he called me and said, Pastor, emotionally, I couldn't handle it anymore. I need you. And I came and ministered to my brother. This darkest valley, it's real. In fact, the person who wrote Psalm 23 is very familiar with a darkest valley. He's very familiar with it. And David, who wrote Psalm 23, he was the second king. He became second king in Israel. And we know that prior to his kingship, that he was running for his life from King Saul, the first king of Israel. And during that time, there was a story in in 1 Samuel chapter 30, is when David and his 600 men took off, left their town to go do something, and they come back and their towns were destroyed by fire, and their wives and children were taken away captive by the Amalekites. And can you just imagine, you come home and your town is destroyed by fire, and all of a sudden your wife is not there, your children are not there because they were taken captives. Can you just imagine the darkest valley? And then all of a sudden they began to weep. And the Bible tells us in that story is that they wept and wept and wept. And they basically just out of strength from weeping. Darkest valley? David knew about it. In fact, here's another thing. Is that all 600 men began to look at David and they wanted to kill David. Because they think that it was his fault. The fact that their towns were burnt and their wives and children were taken captive. And so they wanted to kill him. And so can you just imagine for a moment that intense situation of that darkest valley for David? The fact that his town were burnt down, and then his wife and his children are gone. And then they wanted to kill him. But here, I love what happened after that. In 1 Samuel chapter 30, verse 6, it says, yet David found strength in the Lord his God. He found strength. In the midst of his darkest valley, he found strength in the Lord his God. So the question is, how in the world could David, someone like him, could find strength in the Lord his God in the midst of his darkest valley? Well, we go back to Psalm 23. We can see that this David, this man, knew what to do in the midst of the darkest valley. So look, he said, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. And so the Lord is my shepherd is a declaration of his faith. The fact that Lord is my shepherd, he's got me, he's not going to leave me nor forsake me. The fact that he's going to take care of me in the midst of my darkest valley, he's got me. The Lord is my shepherd is a declaration of faith. And then he said, I will lack nothing. It's a declaration of faith. Not only a declaration of truth, the Lord is my shepherd, but also a declaration of faith. I will lack nothing. He's got me. I'm not going to lack peace. There's no way in the world that God will allow me to lack courage and strength. And so he began to focus from his darkest valley to his God. And that's why David found strength in the Lord his God. Because he began to switch his mind and his focus from his darkest valley to his God. And he began to declare faith and truth. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. And then look at this. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me to quiet waters, beside quiet waters. He restores my souls. He guides me into his righteousness for his name's sake. And so what happens next, David, not only that he began to declare truth and faith, he began to declare about his God and about his faithfulness, about what God has done in his life, and about some incredible truths of God's provisions. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. This is my God who's doing this. So he reminds himself of the goodness of God in his life. David knew about some of these incredible things that God is doing in his life or did in his life. My question is this: do you know your God? Do you know your God? Would you be able to, in the midst of your darkest valley, that you would be able to stand and say and declare a declaration of truth, the Lord is my shepherd, and also a declaration of faith, I will lack nothing, and a declaration of what he has done, reminding yourself the fact that, man, God is bringing me into green pastures in me. He makes me lie down. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He refreshes my soul. And he leads me to the right path for his name's sake. And then, after doing that, then he goes back to his reality. Even though I walk in the darkest valley, because to be honest with you, we all have to go through a darkest valley, don't we? Every single one of you, young or old, and even a lot of young people today are going through some darkest valley. And recently, I was watching. So many people are talking about this social dilemma from Netflix, and so my wife and I began to watch this. What is this about? It's social dilemma, and so it's basically it talks about this technology. You know, you got Google, you got your email, you got Instagram, you got Twitter and Facebook and all this stuff. It's a social dilemma for a young girl who's constantly looking at, the post of her friends. Well, she's beautiful. Oh, she's really pretty. But look at me. I'm not pretty. And then she would post some of her pictures, and then some other girls would bully her. Oh, look at your nose. Oh, look at your ears. Look at that. And then all of a sudden, I'm just ugly. I'm nobody. It's not worth for me to live. So therefore, I'm just going to end my life. Do you know, friends, since 2009, teens suicide from 2009 took an uphill, and it's out of control since social media started. So, darkest valley is real, and even some of our older folks, it's real, isn't it? It's real. So David said, I will fear no evil. But guess what? Why? Because my God is with me. His rod and his staff, they comfort me. It's a declaration of faith that my God is with me. And so, in the midst of your darkest valley, you got to understand that there's power in declaring faith that God is with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. And that's what the Bible says. That is a promise from our God that He will be with you always. Before Jesus left this earth, before He ascended into heaven, He said, I will be with you always. So, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. And this is really a reality of what God can do in the midst of our enemies. It seems like that our enemies are attacking full force left and right. we got to be reminded that in the midst of all of that, God prepares a table. And what do? We sit down with Jesus. We look to him. We look at him face to face and just say, Jesus, I need you. And then he does something incredible that your cup, your life would overflow with this abundance of life and peace and joy. John 10:10, he said so clearly, Jesus said, I have come to give you life and life abundantly. Can you just imagine having that, just face to face with Jesus? All of a sudden, in the midst of your enemies, that he prepares a table for you, to dine with you, to spend time with you. Man, and then all of a sudden your life is just in abundance. Your cup, your life overflows with this goodness. And so here's the thing. Surely your goodness and your love will follow me all the days of my life. In other words, this is another declaration of faith and truth. He declares, surely your goodness, God, surely your love will follow me all the days of my life. That is a declaration of truth. Would you not agree? And faith that no matter what, your goodness and your love will follow me all the days of my life. And then he ends with this. So he's done declaring truth and faith. He's done declaring all the incredible things that God had done in his life. And then he was done just declaring another set of faith and truth. And then he ends with this. And here's my response to you, God. I will dwell in the house of my God forever. I will. What can we learn from David? In the midst of your darkest valley, you got to know and understand that there is an opportunity for you to declare truth, that the Lord is my shepherd, and to declare faith, that I will not be in want, or I will lack nothing. And then you're going to declare the goodness of God in your life, the fact that God did this to me, God did that to me. In fact, I remember my darkest valley is back in 2000 when Annalisa lost her sight. That was the most darkest valley in my life. God did a miracle. My wife is functioning with one eye about 40%. Man, I'm telling you, it's a miracle. She walks with so much of life and love for Jesus. She is so inspiring. And then 2008, we've lost our business. We ended up with a huge debt. And then at the same time, the same year, we almost lost our ministry, and I wanted to give up. It was the most terrible experience ever in my life. I was in my darkest valley. And I'm telling you, 3 years of trying to survive this thing, I wanted to give up. And I appreciate so many people that had embraced me and encouraged me. And God coming and reminding me about truth and faith. So I began to declare who He is. I began to declare some of His promises in my life. I began to declare some of these incredible things that God had done in my life. I began to stay away from focusing on my darkest valley, and I began to look at God and say, God, you are my shepherd. I will not be in want. You make me lie down in green pastures. You lead me besides these quiet waters. He restores my soul. Even though I walk in the darkest valley, that's a reality for me right now, God, but I will fear no evil, for I know that you are with me. Your staff and your rod, they comfort me. Surely your goodness and your love will follow me all the days of my life. And here's what I know, God. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Here's what I know. That God is there in the valley. that God is faithful in the valley, that God will sustain you in the valley. I'm almost done, and I want you to think about this. Just imagine this for a moment. Imagine this. Imagine as you are going through your darkest valley, that God restores you. That you get to experience this abundance that God had promised you in the midst of your darkest valley. Imagine for a moment that in the midst of your darkest valley, that you experience comfort and safety and strength, and God restores your soul. Imagine for a moment that in the midst of your darkest valley, you get to experience this supernatural peace, that you get to experience this incredible joy in the midst of that. In the midst of your darkest valley, that you get to experience His presence in your life. Imagine. And guess what? You can. You can. That if you fix your eyes on the Lord Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith, you can. When you start declaring truth and faith, and when you start reminding yourself the goodness of God in your life and the blessings and the provisions that He has been providing for you, you can. Here's what I know, is that when we are in our darkest valley, we got to remember, here's what we need to do. And those that are watching, here's what we need to do. We got to immediately declare faith and truth. The Lord is my shepherd. He's got me. I will lack nothing. Then I will start mentioning this incredible amount of just reminding myself of His blessings over my life. God is so good. God is so faithful. And being specific about what He has done in your life. Man, I could tell you so many of those things in my life, and I would just remind myself of the goodness of God in my life. Then all of a sudden, you'll find something supernatural that would take place. That now that you were so consumed and overwhelmed with your darkest valley, now you can just look up and say, oh man, God, you are real. And all of a sudden, you'll find strength. You'll find faith. You'll find courage to keep going and to stay the course. And you're going to say, man, God is my God, and He's faithful. He is amazing. He is so good. Surely His goodness and His love will follow me all the days of my life. Are you with me? Are you with me? Come on, are you with me? Those that are watching, I know this, that in the midst of what's happening in our world, God knows and God sees it. What's happening in your own life, God sees it, God knows it. But I just want to encourage you today, friends, to look up and say, God, help me today. And maybe that's you today. You're in your darkest valley. And today you've learned something. We've learned something from David. How in the world that he found strength in the midst of his darkest valley. How Rebecca found strength when she lost her baby and when she was in so much pain and fear. She found strength. It's because they began to focus on God. That's why I love our church, vertical church. It reminds us that we got to be vertical. We got to be constantly thinking about God